quick check-in to where we've arrived so far. Obviously, we've got ears on our bust. They are not modified at all at this point. They're really just cleaned up from the castings and attached in the right spot. Continue to refine, these forms here. They're getting closer to where I'll be happy to leave them. I've pulled those pupils off for now just because they were starting to float around a little bit. Obviously, the most significant change has been peeling the skull off and exposing some of the brain. Just after some conversations with some colleagues, it was starting to have a bit of this kind of B-movie creature feel, which I quite liked, and so I thought I would just exploit that. So that's just a really rough form for the brain right now. Might do a couple different things on each hemisphere, something different on each hemisphere of the brain. Did a little more work in the neck, side to side, to have more bulk here and less and a little more stretched out here. So that's where we're at, and going to carry on. I don't think I'm going to do a whole lot more in these primary and secondary forms before we move on to smoothing out the surface and then adding some details. I think for the purpose of this demo, I think we've refined it far enough, even though there's some obvious problems and some things you could keep messing with. But in the interest of time and to keep this from being a 35 part mini-series, we'll see if we can tie it up relatively soon. Okay, in spite of its numerous flaws and some inaccuracies, it's time to move on to some smoothing and then surface finishing on this piece. So just to catch up where we are, I did finish the exposed brain. One side more hard edge forms, some geometry, some repeated shapes, much more organic approach and treatment. On this side, there was just something appealing about those two hemispheres being rendered in different ways. The other thing I've done here is I've just made a suggestion of some lines here. I might cut in like a bit of a cyborg style panel into the face. Might also get rid of it. We'll see. But where I want to go now is I want to move from this surface to a surface like this that's quite smooth. Doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but having this more of this blank canvas, regular surface, is going to allow us to add in some of those finer details, wrinkles, and textures. So really it's not about changing the form at this time. It's really just getting rid of all of these tool marks and all of these the marks that we've made with the rake. I'm just going to work on this flat area here for the sake of the demo. It should be relatively easy to see. So So just starting with this little bit finer rake. Again, this is a small bandsaw, scroll saw blade that's been bent into shape, and then also the points of the teeth have been filed off, so it's not quite so sharp. And so I don't want to use a lot of pressure. Again, I don't want to alter the form, but I want to change the direction. So I'll go one direction, parallel lines, kind of using the same hand movement over and over. And then I'll go across that, not right at 90 degree. Again, just enough, letting the tool do the work. I'm not really digging in. And already, I think you can see that we're getting rid of some of those lines. Again, we don't need a mirror finish on it. We just want to get a surface that we're able to see our wrinkles and folds and skin textures, and not the tool marks. Now, the other thing that this does when you start to smooth out the surface is you do start to see all of your design flaws and all your little mistakes you've made with the general form. Again, because of the calendar more than anything, I'm going to see if I can ignore most of those. If you're not one of my students and you're just watching this, just to give you a bit of context, this is kind of the final demo for our class this year, and the class is officially over, so I do want to finish this up. So now I'm going to move to this little guitar string rake, and it's the same approach. Just small repeated movements. Changing the direction. Okay, that's actually pretty good. Now it shows up fairly shiny on camera. Then I'm going to take this this bit of spongy material, a scouring pad or anything will work. So I'm just moving this in the lights so I can see if there's any big marks that I want to get rid of. You can see at the edges would need to do a little more work, but in the center here where we're focusing, it's actually looking pretty good. Now there is some discoloration where you can see where some of those larger gouges were. They're a little bit lighter. I'm not too worried about that. Again, we are going to add some skin texture with this wire tool, and now I'm moving back and forth rather than just going in one direction. If you're careful, because I don't want to make any gouges in the surface, you can kind of burnish the clay a little bit. This is probably excessive. That's pretty good. Again, and the reason it shows up every little flaw in the surface is because it's reflecting so much light. The surface becomes so regular that nothing gets hidden by the tool marks. So I'm going to go ahead and work across the entire surface of the piece, trying to get it all to about this point. Now you will see lots of demos if you look online, if you've been watching other people use oil-based clay or monster clay or other oil-based clays, where you can use solvent, things like lighter fluid. I really, personally, I tend to stay away from any solvents in my own studio. It works great, but I prefer to not introduce any hydrocarbon-based solvents into my studio. Okay, so that's where we'll go next. So just a quick check-in, about 3 hours of work. You can see this side from this point forward to the midline. That's enough smoothing for what we need to do next. You can see all the tool marks are still evident on this side, but here, even though there are some variations in the surface, and you can see some of those deeper gouges, this is enough of a flat surface to put in some skin texture and some pores and some of those finer wrinkles. And you can see, I know there's quite a bit of glare from the lights, but you can see every little variation and wobble in the surface once it's smooth. So if this was a full production piece, at this point I would go in and just fill in some of these divots and some of these wobbles here. I'm not going to do that for this demo piece, obviously, but that would be the next step. So where I'll go from here is to get this side caught up, and then our next demo will be skin textures, pores, folds, and wrinkles. So about 6 hours total work from where we first started smoothing out these forms. Again, you can still see some of the larger marks, larger cut marks. That's fine. As I mentioned a few times, the smoother the surface gets, the more light it reflects, and the more you're able to see every single little flaw in the form. So again, for the sake of time, I'm going to ignore that for now. So we'll move on to put in the some different textures, concentrating on some of these wrinkles around the eyes and the mouth and down through the neck. We'll add just some general skin texture as well. The other thing I think I'll do is I'll put a couple small stickers for the pupils again, just so we're seeing that eye direction as we sculpt in some of the wrinkles.